Okay, my name's Phil Wildman, and over the next 30-40 minutes or so, I want to have a look at the basic details of the new Progress Test series. And if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them, but it won't be until the end of the webinar that I'm able to answer the questions. Thanks very much. Okay, just before we start looking at the particular details of the Progress Test series, let me just share with you an assessment model that we're developing and using at GL Assessment. We feel it's very important, obviously, to get an all-round view of a pupil so that we can do the very best to make sure we maximise performance for them. And certainly attainment assessments are very important in that. It's very important that we know where a student is now, where the gaps are in their learning, and how we can move them forward. But also we suggest that alongside that, we take a look outside of attainment and look at what could be in the future in terms of ability. And where that attainment and ability shows some discrepancy, that leads us automatically into being able to investigate barriers to learning. Why aren't people achieving their full potential? What is that degree of underachievement? So if we just place these assessments on that model. So the Progress Test series in Maths, English and Science fit very much within the attainment section of that. But don't forget alongside that really meaningful comparisons in terms of ability, using the cognitive abilities test, is really vital in making that easy spotting of underachievement. And where that exists, again, investigating it to remove potential barriers. Okay, now let's start looking at some of the specifics within the Progress Test series. So if I start with a very, very simple overview, and this is for all the parts of the Progress Test series, there is a brand new version of Progress Test English, and this will replace the Progress in English and the Progress in Maths. So these are brand new versions, not a rebranding. It is entirely rewritten with a new standardization. On top of that is a totally new assessment, and that's in science. We didn't have an equivalent progress test in science before now. So just to reiterate, these are new questions with a new standardization. It's bang up to date with the new national curriculum. And in fact, we've actually taken the opportunity to add an extra level of assessment, and that's 11T, a transition test at age 11. I'm not going to give more detail now because we see that recur as we look at the specifics within each of the progress test areas. Okay, oops, over eager. So the new tests are very much aligned to the curricula across the whole UK. It is true that they are a response to the new national curriculum in England, and as I say, they are matched to that. There's a new reporting, and these are very much in the style that we've gone with the cognitive abilities test, and that is that they are much more annotated than in the past. It includes narrative to explain the data rather than providing the data in a rather flat way, and they're designed around particular audiences, the teacher themselves, the parents of the students, and other people involved in the educational process. Those reports include the ability to track progress year on year embedded within the reporting system. Again, more on that later, but that is using the system of standardized age scores to track progress from year to year. And perhaps because of that, we see this as a potential solution for schools looking for a replacement for levels in England, providing the school with that ability to have a bigger picture than within the school themselves, to start looking at the performance level of individual students where they're always benchmarked against the national picture. And because these assessments are for different age groups, that allows us actually to be able to see whether performance at a particular age is in line with the expectations for their age or above or below that. So, when are the assessments available? The progress test in English at all its levels, 5 to 11 and 12 to 14, is available now. And alongside that is also the progress test in maths at primary ages, 5 to 11. So that's out now, published now, and available. The additional levels, the ones we talked about earlier being 11T, the transition test for both English and maths, will be published at the end of June, and we're anticipating the first use of that in the September. In the September also will be the progress test in science at all its levels, 8 to 14, including the transition element, and that will be available September 2015. The only element that is slightly more distant is the secondary element of the progress test in maths, which is due in the spring of next year, spring 2016. So now I'm going to have a look at each of the assessments in specifically and with a little bit more detail. So turning first then to the progress test in English. We've mentioned that the various levels at progress test English age 5 and 6, and that's what the numbers relate to. They're not national curriculum year groups, they're ages. So progress test ages 5 and 6 tests are very much about reading readiness, and within that there will be a phonics section, phonological awareness more properly. There will be a comprehension-based score, and this will be based on a single passage, short single passage of reading. At age 7, we're introducing the concept of English skills as separate to reading comprehension. Throughout the reporting and throughout the other levels of progress test English, we will be talking about English skills and reading comprehension. English skills at this level, we're talking about spelling, grammar, and punctuation. The comprehension, the reading comprehension at age 7, will again just be based on a relatively short single passage. For progress test 8 to 11, again English skills, spelling, punctuation and grammar, but here the reading comprehension now will be based on 2 linked passages, 1 fiction, 1 fact. Progress test at English 12 to 14, here slight difference, still English skills reported separately to reading comprehension, but the English skills are through spelling still, but a proofreading task and sentence completion. All of these will be set in context, and the reading comprehension again around the 2 passages, fact and fiction. Lastly, the 11T, just to add a bit of flesh to that idea, the idea of a transition test is that we're providing that for use initially in the first half term of secondary education. It's very much in line with the level of difficulty of the progress test 11. It will have the content, the difficulty of the primary level, but it will have a kind of secondary look and feel. And the idea really is to set it up as a potential secondary baseline. So right at the start of secondary, especially where feeder schools are not providing this kind of information from the progress test series, secondary schools can use this assessment, and they can use it alongside other assessments they'll be using then to form this overall baseline, perhaps the cognitive abilities test, for instance. So, progress test 5 to 7, I said before that it's very much phonics, reading readiness, and so it is. It will have a Key Stage 1 look and feel to it. The spelling and grammar punctuation only comes in at ages 6 and 7. And the reading comprehension I mentioned before, the questions alongside that are actually embedded within the story text. It's not as if an entire passage is given before questions. And in fact, at the earlier stages, that reading comprehension, the passage is actually read out, so are the practice questions, so are the questions themselves, not the answers, the questions. As the children are slightly older, at 6 and 7, then the passages are still read out, but the options, the questions, are actually expected to be read by the pupils themselves. I said along the way there that there are practice questions to make sure that the teacher is reassured that the child knows what it is they're doing. A little further up, 8 to 11, from age 8 and above, the expectation is that the students read the passage and the questions independently. And by this age, there are 2 theme texts, and the information, the story, the texts are actually well-known texts extracted from picture books and children's authors, and this should be very age-appropriate and very engaging. 11, we've talked about the transition test and we've talked about its purpose. Perhaps just to reiterate that it should be used in the first half of the autumn term if it's going to be appropriately used. It does contain the content, as we said before, of the primary phase. Beyond that, to 12 to 14, the English skills, we've said, are through the proofreading and the sentence completion and the comprehension based on 2 linked passages as it is at age 11. If we can now turn to have a look at the progress test in maths. Major changes here, you'll know that there are major changes in terms of the national curriculum, in terms of the maths and the English, with things that content that perhaps would have been taught later being brought forward, and a level of difficulty that's increased. And that's been reflected in the design of the progress test series. And the content areas and the process categories are changing from the progress in maths, if you're familiar with that. The contents now are number, measurement, geometry, statistics and algebra, although some of those are appropriate to different ages. The process skills, fluency, mathematical reasoning and problem solving, very much reflect those changes in difficulty level and emphasis within the new national curriculum in England. At 5 to 7, we'll be looking at applying and understanding the maths, and at age 8 and above, we also introduce to that a mental maths component. That's quite short, somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes, but it does form an integral part of the assessment itself. Just like the progress test English, there will be this new level, this level 11T, which will be, as we've said, the transition assessment, and this will be very much matched to the normal progress test age 11. It will therefore include the mental maths and the applying and understanding maths, and be close to that primary phase level. Just running through some of those age groups for you then, just as in progress test English. Just to draw your attention to the little bit that's in red there, ages 5 and 6 for the progress test maths and the progress test English are only available via paper delivery, paper format only for ages 5 and 6, progress test English and progress test maths. The digital delivery of these begins at age 7 and carries on up. So the assessments at age 5, 6 and 7, they're approximately 35 minutes long. It does vary just by a minute or two over that age range. The questions are read out by the teacher, or in the case of the 7, by the computer. There's very, very little written information on the screen or on paper. For obvious reasons, we want to make sure that we're actually assessing mathematics, not the literacy level that leads to the students, the children themselves, being able to understand the mathematics task. So we've kept that written element to an absolute minimum. At these very early ages, it's the teacher that sets the pace, and in the 7 on the online version, the pace is of course set by the reading out of questions on the computer. The mental maths aspect, I said that it was relatively short, and so it is. 10 to 15 minutes throughout. It only becomes 15 minutes at the later age ranges. And it starts being included at age 8, not before. They're individually timed questions, and it looks at basic fluency in this ability to manipulate and to create mental maths answers. If you're using the online version, the digital edition, then this is all part of that administration, and all the timings, etc., are done within that normal administration. If you're choosing the paper option, then to make sure that timings are precise and it's done in a very consistent way, there is actually going to be a downloadable audio file with the questions and the expected gaps for pupils to make their responses. Progress test maths 8 to 11, slightly longer, around 45 minutes, again up to 60 at the top end of that range. Mental maths on top of that, 10 to 15 minutes. And for most of those age range, the learners are expected to read the printed questions. There's not a lot of reading to be done. We again are still aware that even at this age range, the language could be a barrier, so it's not excessive, but at this level, they are expected to read the questions for themselves. Having said that, at age 8, there are some written and some spoken questions. So, at 11, just as in Progress Test English, there's this transition level. It mirrors the age 11 for Progress Test Maths, in that it's approximately 60 minutes long with a 15-minute mental test. We've said it to death now, it's aimed at the same level as the Progress Test Maths 11. And it's for the use at the start of that entry year at secondary school. So beyond that, ages 12, 13 and 14 mirror that length of time, 60-minute tests with 15 minutes for the mental test itself. I now want to turn to the reporting. And for the whole series, this is the plan. As I said right at the start, the plan is that we follow the template, as it were, for the newly redeveloped CAT 4, and that is to create reports for audiences. And there will be a group report for teachers, and this will be in PDF format that is very extensive and very detailed and well annotated, perhaps unlike the previous Progress in Maths and Progress in English series. That will also be available in Excel format, so that if you want to adapt that information, if you want to take it back into your school management system, or if you want to do further manipulation on it, that's the way to go. The individual student report for teachers, a lot more detail, and that's the bit that includes the narrative where we've worked with specialists in the field to create information, pointers, questions of things you might not have thought about that are linked to particular scores on the assessments. Also, just like in the CAT test, we've introduced an individual report for parents, and this includes narrative as well that allows parents to actually get involved in this data and to help support their children in their work. On top of this, there's a cluster report. If you're part of a federation or a group of schools, it's possible for us to produce an overarching report that allows the head office, as it were, to be able to look at trends across a number of schools. A combination report comes very back to the idea of that model of assessment, and that is we really want to encourage these attainment assessments to be used alongside ability. It's such an easy way to spot underachievement that we're producing combination reports that look, as with CAT 4 as the kind of anchor assessment, with attainment assessments to actually show up where there are major differences and to help you spot it by categorizing any differences as above average, average and below average. That combination report for science, because science is coming out a little bit later, is actually to follow in 2016. I have got some examples of the reports. You may not be able to make out the details so well. I'll be concentrating more on generalized content. So, starting off then with the group report for teachers. This is true for progress test maths and progress test English, but I will be mostly using the progress test maths as examples, and then to follow that there will be a couple of slides that are ones that are just specific to progress test English. So the group report for teachers probably looks quite familiar to you if you use our assessments. Students' names on the left, all kinds of extra detail regarding tutor group, etc. can be added. We need to know the age of test, obviously, and that's for the standardized age scores, which are shown in the normal way, both as a list of their numbers and pictorially with confidence bands. Overall stay nines are also shown, and their relation to that UK distribution is shown by the NPR, the National Percentile Rank. So if you can make out the details, that first student, for instance, their National Percentile Rank is 20, which puts them in the bottom 20% of performance for their age across the whole UK. So that's very clearly showing up at a level of difficulty, whereas the second student's National Percentile Rank places them in the top 4% of ability within their performance ability across the UK. The last column showing progress is categorized, as I said before, but not until you have, obviously, 2 years' worth of results. Otherwise, we can't show that progress. This is another part of the group report for teachers where we're able to actually split the data and slice it, particularly for focus groups, special interest groups. This one, I think, is males and females. Yes, it is. However, it could be anything. It could be not quite anything, but it certainly could be English as an additional language, free school meals, ethnicity. It could be the definition of the pupil premium grant, the disadvantaged students. It could be virtually everything, because there are 2 customizable fields which allow you to actually set up your own focus groups and look at that data separately to the rest, but always against a nationally benchmarked sample. This is that progress report. As I say, you do need 2 years worth of progress, because that's what that scatter graph shows. It shows a second administration score up the vertical axis and a first administration standardized age score along the horizontal axis. And then scattered on that are the scores for the various individuals. And if they fall within that white banding, then they're making average progress. And that's defined by the middle 68% of the population, what they've done in terms of standardized age score changes. And if they're falling into the green area, they're making above average, and into the kind of pinky color, they're making below average. So a very, again, straightforward system for looking at year-on-year progress using the standardized age scores. And that's true, although it is an example for maths, that would be available for the progress test English as well. Okay, turning to the individual reports then. This is an individual's report. Again, the example is maths, and I've explained why, but here we've just got the details at the top just for the one student. No doubt you'll see that it does have a maths national curriculum level. And that's not because we've forgotten that the national curriculum levels are no longer reportable or compulsory. It's very much that in this kind of interregnum, as it were, that we want to be able to show something meaningful. And a lot of schools in our focus groups have said they quite like the idea of referencing back a level of performance to the old system. but it will only stay there until the dust has settled, as it were, and we know a better thing to map to. However, as we've just been looking at, standardized age scores really are the way to go. It gives us the position, the level of performance reference to that age group within the UK at all the age ranges, so it's telling us that whether they are working at that expected age or not. Plus, we can use it for progress year to year. Anyway, for the individual at the bottom of the screen, you can also see where we've split up the curriculum content into the various parts, the fluency, the conceptual understanding, and so on. And there we show for each of those areas how the student performed against the national sample. Ideal again for looking at those broad areas of strengths and weaknesses against national sample rather than just the group that the child is in. This is, you probably won't be able to see this very well, but this is the part of that narrative we were talking about before in terms of implications for teaching and learning. This has been developed for all the Progress Test Series assessments, working with specialists and experts in the field. I appreciate you can't see it. There are samples which we can direct you to that you can have a better look at. But this will be available within all of these individual student reports and is based around their absolute score, high, low, intermediate, plus where their particular strengths seem to lie in terms of the curriculum areas. Also within the individual reports, but this time an individual report for parents. A little bit of explanation at the top about what is a progress test in maths, why the school might be doing it, why it might be useful, and then at the bottom, the description of the kind of performance levels that the individual has made and how parents can interact with that to support progress. Now, I said most of those examples, as you've seen, were in maths, but there are just a couple of slides here that show a difference in the progress test English. This is an individual student report for teachers in English. Why is it different? Because we're reporting separately on English skills and reading comprehension. The reading skills score and the reading comprehension are shown as stanines. Those stanines, the difference, the relative difference in those scores is also used within the narrative to tell the story of how their strengths, either in the spelling, punctuation and grammar aspect, differs to their understanding of text. So here we're able to produce this extra scattergraph which shows that relative difference as well as overall performance. Again, the progress from year to year is only there when you've got data from the 2 years. Oops, I'm still too eager with this. This is slightly different as well because we are looking at the spelling, punctuation and grammar outside of reading comprehension. We've split that up even further so that you can see the spelling, grammar, punctuation separate to the reading, narrative and non-narrative, the fact and fiction scores, reference to national sample, but also the types of reading comprehension questions, retrieval, inference, and the higher level authorial technique. Again, we've split that up and it's always referenced to that national sample. So obviously that level of detail there comes about in the English and not the maths, where it's just split into the 4 curriculum content areas. Okay, last one. Shall we have a look at progress test in science? Just to remind you, the publication date for this is September. So we're slightly earlier through its development and there'll perhaps be less I can show you, certainly in terms of reports. However, they should be mirroring the Progress Test English and Maths reports. So, what can I tell you about it? I can tell you a little bit about the structure, and that is, At ages 8, 9 and 10, these will look specifically at year knowledge of that particular age knowledge. So testing, if you like, chunks of yearly knowledge. On top of that, the Progress Test Science 11 actually looks across the whole of the Key Stage 2 curriculum. So it's summarising Key Stage 2 curriculum, and it's taken, obviously, at the end of primary phase. The 11T, the transition assessment, shares many of the similarities with the other assessments, i.e. it's at the same level of difficulty of age 11, and it also summarises across the whole of Key Stage 2 curriculum. But obviously the content, the Progress Test Science 11 is different, slightly different, and taken at the start of secondary. Now beyond that, Progress Test Science 13 and 14, and it's a combined age, 13 and 14, is available at 2 different levels, 2 separate tests. Progress Test Science 13 and 14A, Progress Test Science 13 and 14B. Both of these summarise the whole of the Key Stage 3 curriculum. This isn't looking at yearly chunks. These assessments look across the whole of the Key Stage 3 curriculum. The idea here is that they can be taken at the end of Key Stage 3, whether that's a end of Year 8, because it's a 2-year end of Key Stage 3, or at the end of Year 9, if you're doing a 3-year Key Stage 3. You'll note that there isn't an end of Year 8, a Progress Test Science 12. That's because science is not taught in sequence in lower secondary, and it's not possible to compile a test for those discrete year groups. That's why levels 13 and 14 summarise Key Stage 3 knowledge. The tests cover the programme of study, which may be delivered, as I said, over 2 or 3 years. These are just some sample questions. I've taken these from the standardisation samples, and in standardisation we have a number of questions which may or may not appear in the final version, so I'm just showing you as to type. So question 25 and 32, these are sample ones around the ages of 8 and 9. You'll see that they are multiple choice, and you can get an idea of the kind of illustrations and the way that the questions are presented. This one's for slightly older, age 10 and 11. Again, you can see they're multiple choice. You can see also that the amount of text narrative is increasing here, but still very colourful, I think very engaging. And this last one is an example from that 13 and 14 one, which is, I think, a food web. And again, that's only part of the question, but you can see the style. In terms of extra things, what's common across the whole series, there'll be an extra at-a-glance guide if you're doing it at paper with every order. If you're doing it online, that will be part of the help material you get online. There will be online documents that actually link various questions and areas to the national curricula of the UK. And very important, that's why it's in bold to remind me, is that the technical report will also include conversions from the old series, the Progress In series, the Progress in English, for example, to Progress Test English scores. There will be a conversion table, a lookup table, so you can just look at the score that existed in Progress in English and see what that would be in Progress Test English, so that all that legacy information is certainly not lost. It's still part of the whole process in looking longitudinally at progress, both for the individual students and for, of course, the school. I've mentioned that the reports do include explanations of all the technical terms, the standardised terms, but extra information can be available. And the very last bit of information I want to tell you about is I appreciate that we've only seen quite small details of questions, and I haven't specifically picked out points on them. If you would like to look at sample questions in much more detail and in your own time, that's the link to follow. Those questions are there, and you can see for a number of different age levels of the Progress Test series sample questions to have a look at.